like a multinational. A lot of my work revolves around transparency considerations and compliance risk. And again, a lot of that involves things like international government engagement, and also engagement with civil leaders on the ground. So community leadership, things like that. And a lot of my work revolves around complex areas. So I'm the consultant that they might send to places like Syria or Lebanon or Venezuela, Colombia, Honduras, Haiti. I was in Haiti just a few months ago. I'm the guy that will go and do things that have to do with that market entry or risk reduction measures, social impact considerations again, and engagement on the ground in places that most other people just don't want to go. So
yeah. So let's start home from the Western Hemisphere. You spoke about your also involvement in Haiti and how you do consultancy and so on and so forth.
mhm.
What is really going on in the Americas? What is going on in the Western Hemisphere? This competition, if you can call it that, between the US and Canada. What is really going on? The Canadian Prime Minister recently was in China, and the reports came out is that he did a deal. He did some deals with the Chinese for EV cars and a host of other products that will be coming in from China at low cost to Canada, and the big brother America is not happy with that. What's your position on this sort of Trump relationship with with the Canadian leadership, and
Well,
how that is
as
playing out?
right.
Um,
As an American, right, there's two considerations, right? Geoeconomic and geopolitical. So for me, obviously I have to consider national security interests, which are, a big deal for us in the Western Hemisphere when it comes to what the Chinese intentions are or what they're doing with our neighbors and friends in the region, right? So there's that perspective. There's also the perspective for me, the realization and understanding that from a pragmatic perspective, when I'm talking to like a former ambassador from Chile that I've known for a long time, he'll say, hey, we welcome all kinds of investment. If it's good for us, we welcome that, whether it comes from the Chinese, the United States, etc. Now, one of the things a lot of people realize is that you have to have people that know how to manage those relationships in Latin America with the Chinese. There's deep concerns on the United States side when it comes to how far the Chinese have gone with infrastructure, investment in Panama, around the Panama Canal. And then Canada making these moves is also concerning, right? Now, we also consume a lot of products, and a lot of our supply chains are based on things coming out of China or that are Chinese inputs to other country supply chains. So this is kind of a symbiotic relationship. And, not to bloviate too much on this, but I've been using that word all week. From the US perspective, what I think is you have to manage the expectations of other countries in terms of their costs and what their supply chains needs are versus what we can provide as an alternative. So it's less about competition and more about, hey, can we offer an alternative? Or is there something that we can make sure that what they're getting from China doesn't influence them in ways that we want to maintain our control over? When I say control, I'm using that very loosely.
yeah, I see where you're coming from, but don't you see also from the perspective of countries like Canada and Mexico, they'll say, hang on a second, your biggest trading partner is China. America imports far more, items, commodities, whatever you want to call it, from China than any other country in the world,
That is
even
true.
bigger than India. So, and then you're telling the Canadians, look, you can buy EV cars because we make it in America, even though it's 5 times the price, you have to buy from us. So I think that's
And
where
that's
the
why
problem is coming from.
well, and I agree with you. Like, that's the thing. A lot of our supply chains go back to China. It's a symbiotic relationship in many ways when we're talking about production, productivity, input, supply chains, et cetera. There's very few supply chains in the United States that aren't at least touched by China somehow, right? Not to mention China is a consumer of some of our products, and many of our trade and supply chains through other countries go back to China as well. If China wasn't a purchaser of certain commodities out there, a lot of what we sell to other countries in terms of technology, whether it's in the agriculture space or whatever, there wouldn't be a market for it. So for me, it's like, okay, as an American, it's less about us putting pressure on Canada and more about us offering Canada the right alternative, whether it's from us or from people we're more allied with, right? Or aligned with, like India. So one of the discussions I had many years ago when it came to countering the balance of the geoeconomic power of China in the region, it was, why don't we incentivize India, which could probably also produce both material and services and compete with China in the region, right? They don't have government policy that drives that. So, Chinese involvement in the region outpaces, or at least it did outpace, India by a factor of at least 10, right? And this was 5 or 6, 10 years ago. So if we wanted to incentivize someone else who could provide a good deal to Canada that we're aligned with, right? And or that we also have more involvement with in their supply chains, we could make deals between them and India, for instance. We could incentivize that. And that's just one example. And that's kind of just off the cuff. I'm not going to pretend like I have the entire structure of that out there, but I believe in creating incentives rather than constantly making it sort of like this backlash.
Yeah. So I mean, it's good you have those ideas out, but doesn't that go against your whole idea of free markets, the liberal economic and trade policies and so on and so forth? Because if you're saying, oh, the government have to heavily intervene to force Google, for instance, or Amazon, or I think the biggest one is Apple. Oh, you can't do it in China where it's far more efficient, when it's cost effective, where they can manufacture at a very fast pace and so constantly supply to the market without any issues. Instead, can you send it to a new testing ground in India where they can help us put these things together? That might not really work. So that's the problem. So the people that own these companies, they're also looking out for themselves.
Yes.
And they trust the Chinese system to make things happen. But you are saying, why don't you send it to India or Vietnam?
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying that people don't have a right to go with what works for them in terms of supply chain, price, et cetera, right? We do have to be more competitive when it comes to price, right? However, when I look at the free market system, I'm thinking also, as countries, we also compete with each other for these positions. I don't think that's outside the realm of the free market. I'm not a libertarian, so it's not. I don't think we should just go to like complete libertarian anarchy in the world. That's a totally different concept. But if it's not something, like I said, if it's not something that we can supply competitively, then I do think we should incentivize our other allies to be able to supply that competitively, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's fine. And again, India is one of those options. It also doesn't mean that we can't work with China on certain things. We could say, hey, you know what, China, how about you supply just these components for whatever it is that Canada needs, and we'll back off the pressure here because we're going to supply this other piece to whatever it is. And I'm speaking on this very vaguely, but I mean, that's just how this thinking goes.
Yeah. I think the whole relationship
we really do have to recognize it's not just our national security at interest. We do have to be more competitive,
Yeah, absolutely. But that is not happening. And your system needs some structural changes, in my opinion. But let's go to Venezuela, which is we saw, I think about 2 weeks ago or there, about the U.S. president announced that the president of Venezuela and his wife have been captured and extracted from the country to face criminal trial in New York. So this is an elected president of a sovereign country.
Was he elected?
Yeah, he was elected. I mean, you can dispute the outcome and say, oh, the election was not free and fair. And some will say, maybe you can look at what happened in Florida in 2000 with or 2004 or whatever, with the second Bush election or thereabout. So again, you might not really like the process, but a lot of people are saying, hang on a second, the US have gone into Venezuela and kidnapped the president on the false pretense that, this is a narco war against Venezuela.
Right.
So I want your take on that and how, and find the nexus between that and how that corresponds with international law, basically.
So I'm not going to speak too much on international law, right? Because that gets into the nuance of what is it, how do you enforce it, different things, right? Let me come at it from the perspective of what thresholds we have for taking action, right? So the first one is, in our hemisphere, our national security is a primary concern, right? And then the security of our different partners in the region, right, and all of our neighbors is also a primary concern. So if we go back 26 years, and let me try and paint this out as quickly as I can. There were different things that happened over the course of 26 years, almost completely without any of our involvement, right? Where it's like, how we have to ask ourselves, okay, how long do we sit on our hands before we actually take some kind of action? And how much action should we take for the biggest impact, positive impact, right? The change, because mostly you want change in behavior. You don't necessarily want regime change. You want change in behavior. You want change in alignment, right? Mm-hmm. So keeping those things in mind, you got to remember, after Chavez took over the government, okay, the Cuban apparatus moved in and took over intelligence services and immediately turned that intelligence inward to where they were working with the Venezuelans and also training the Venezuelans on how to operate counterintelligence against their own people. Okay. So it's sort of this neo-imperialism of Cuba going back 26 years. Okay. That's number one. Now you move on through time and completely out of our hands, right? We're not touching this. China and Russia go in and make some deals that are really questionable, that don't necessarily help Venezuela. Their infrastructure slowly starts to crumble. By 2013, when the price of oil drops, which was the only thing upholding the economy, because whether you go back to the 90s, 80s, and 70s in Venezuela, or whether you fast forward through the 2000s, the biggest issue was that Venezuelans only export was oil. It's 95% oil economy, oil exports. They didn't really diversify. So that was a problem both for prior to Chavez and a problem after. So then you fast forward 2013, Chavez is gone, price of oil plummets, they owe a lot of money to China, I think currently $60 billion in debt to them. Their infrastructure is crumbling, all of their talent is leaving. And by 2013, not only have the previous professional class left, now you have everybody else flooding out of the country. So now you have a refugee crisis that has been ongoing for 13 years across pretty much every nation in the Western Hemisphere, the US included. And when you have anyone from South America running to Peru as refugees, that's a sign that you got something wrong going on. Colombia has absorbed millions of...
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because it's coming from a point of view where it sounds almost like America, it's the big daddy, is the benefactor, and seeing all this poor Venezuelans suffering as a result of mismanagement, as a result of incompetence,
and without
Chavez and Maduro,
without us doing anything. That's the thing.
Yeah. Without the U.S. actually doing anything, and this is happening because these guys are so incompetent. Well, some would say, if you look at the history of Venezuela, the U.S. have constantly intervened, even.
Sav, you're frozen for me. We'll take a minute.
After independence.
Hey, Sav, you've been frozen. And it looks like you're frozen on both the live and YouTube.
Okay, I think it's back. Sorry.
Now you're back. Okay.
Yeah, the internet here in Africa sometimes is really problematic. So basically, so people are saying, hang on a second. Yeah, because when you speak from this point of view of like almost moral high ground, where you say, oh, look at what they've done, especially after Chavez took over.
No moral high ground. Just we didn't touch them. They
but I'm coming. Just one second. Mm-hmm. The U.S. And by the way, the records are there, sent in a lot of people for purpose of espionage. There's this documentary I saw about the go-to guy. This was under President Bush, by the way. This guy was the head of the America's foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere, and he was openly talking about how they've infiltrated Chavismo, how they they tried to kick out Chavez, and there were even allegations that even the poisoning and the cancer. So again, these are all conspiracy theories, but the real practical things that I want to speak about is the economic sanctions.
Sure.
The US did it, even encouraging the Europeans to join in. the sanctions. You're preventing them from selling their oils, and this is what is having the negative impact on the economy, which is forcing the
But
people to
what year
run and
did
to
we do
starve.
that? Just what year did we do that?
Oh, from the last days of Chavez, after the elections. I think it was after. It didn't just start under Maduro.
2019. That's when we actually
No, the
sanctioned their
sanctions.
oil. So
Yeah,
like the
because the oil
sanctions,
companies.
what's
No,
that?
no, it depends on the kind of sanctions you're talking about.
Right.
I think from around the period, I can't remember the last election that Chavez won. There were some sanctions that were loaded on Venezuela, and you can check me up on this. And you're referring to the period where Maduro decided to say, enough, your oil companies are no longer welcome here. And this is when America.
That was before Maduro. That was before Maduro. The expropriation of the companies was before Maduro. And
Yeah,
we got most of that back. We took over
but-
Citgo in the US. It didn't actually affect much. They still owe us like 20 billion or something. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, but I'm talking about you took over some of the assets, right?
In the States, yeah, we took over Citgo.
Yeah. So, but
Because
the point I'm making is that
expropriated the companies in Venezuela, and then they didn't have any way to pay that back. So eventually, and this all went through the courts. This wasn't just like, the president snapped his fingers and this happened. This went through court systems, international.
Yeah, but my point is that it's not just about what the leadership in Venezuela have done or have been unable to do. It's also about your own involvement in terms of sanctions.
Correct.
And like you're doing exactly the same thing to Cuba for over 60 years.
Well, Cuba is actually something I disagree with. I've gone against my friends on the Cuban embargoes, but that's a different story. Here's actually I got a good thing to share with you on that. But just on the Venezuela stuff, just keep in mind, most of the sanctions, when people talk about sanctions on Venezuela, it's usually specific individuals within the government and or criminal actors. Okay, and you can go back through the is it OFAC list? You can get the emails from them every week directly from the U.S. government on who's on that list. And so for many years, you would see week after week someone from the Venezuelan government or whatever that would be sanctioned. So when they sanctioned
this was way back, in 2005. So this was under Chavez.
Right. Well, okay. So again, specific individuals. I think if I remember correctly, there were even times where we did them a favor and bought some of their oil because they weren't doing so great. And then it wasn't until 2019 that we had like direct sanctions on their oil exports. And it almost didn't matter because it's not like they were really doing that much. Like their production dropped significantly after 2013 and their infrastructure has been crumbling. That's another reason, like when people say, oh, we want their oil, it's like, do we though? Because we can invest in Guyana and do better. Like it doesn't.
So yeah, exactly. You can look at the Department of State. You can look at the Department of Treasury. And you can look at the long list of executive orders, starting from 2005 and then 2019, Executive Order 13884, blocking the property of the government of Venezuela. Executive Order 13857, taking additional steps to address the national emergency with respect to Venezuela, and blocking the property of additional persons. So it's a litany of sanctions.
A litany of sanctions against specific individuals, though. Like a lot of these people had property.
It's not just about individuals. I'm talking about their oil production. I'm talking about oil sales to the international market. And when Trump came in,
so like production equipment, stuff like that, right?
No, but when Trump came in, what did Trump do? He started imposing sanctions on third parties, other countries buying oil from Venezuela, threatening military action to the point where some of those tankers that were on the coast of Venezuela had to run away because he said he was coming to bomb them. So again, this is the point I'm making.
Recently, here's the thing: take the last 26 years, and this is why I was building this up. You start with the Cuban influence, okay? Cuban imperialism. You can call it neo-imperialism. That's what it is. Then you have Chinese and Russian influence, okay, in whatever form, including a lot of debt that Venezuela on its own will never be able to pay back. In fact, there's probably a good chance that as we redevelop our relationship with Venezuela, we're going to do deals to restructure that debt and pay back China on their behalf. But that's a whole nother story. Now, going forward, now you have them working with the IRGC. Now, not only do you have a geoeconomic insecurity issue, now you have a relationship that involves the IRGC, Hezbollah, which Hezbollah is involved in drug trafficking out of not only Venezuela, but other countries, as well as counterfeiting, smuggling, et cetera. So now it becomes a much broader security concern, national security concern, not just a geoeconomic concern, not just geopolitical games. Now you have drones being manufactured inside of Venezuela, and you can look up the company and the guy that owns it, all this other stuff. And so now we have this much higher threshold. It's like, at what threshold do we need to take action, right? So then obviously these steps were taken to mitigate at least some of the concerns around international law and the War Powers Act, okay? And whether people agree with them or not is not what I'm here to state. I'm going to say that, yes, we started a blockade, right? We had our sanctions. Those sanctions were being skirted. We went ahead and designated, and rightly so, these narco-trafficking organizations they were connected to as foreign terrorist organizations. So now you can leverage military power in a limited way to go in and take and either snatch up or take care of some of these ongoing transnational criminal organizations or the head of those organizations. And Maduro has an indictment going back to 2020. So now you have his organizations that he's connected to as FTOs. You also have an election that he blatantly stole from other people. Now, people can try and disagree with that, but the thing is, the entire international community, except for Russia and China and Iran, and neutral observers on the ground, all disputed his election results.
When you say the international community, when you say the international community, are you referring to America and their Western European allies and Canada? I mean, Mexico is not jumping. Mexico is not jumping from the top of the building. Colombia is not doing that. Brazil is not doing that. The rest of the free world is not doing that. In fact, the rest of the free world are those that are diametrically opposed to the position of the West. So when you're talking about international law, what aspect of international law gives you the right to kidnap a president and his wife?
Hold on. I'm getting there. Again, what I'm saying is I'm painting the picture so that people understand the nuance of this, whether they agree or disagree with the legalities, right? Mm-hmm. So many countries, and I'm not referring just to the West. I would have to go back through the list of countries in Latin America that have also spoken out against Maduro, and many of them have done that since his first election. They've also spoken out against the fact that they made an extra judicial body from 2017 to 2020 that changed the way that they can monitor and post election results. It's called the, I can't remember the name. Anyway, so it changed the entire structure.
Yes, so this is, yes. So you're saying that they don't have a perfect system. They don't have a system that you believe is truly functional.
They have a system that's just simply not recognized. And Maduro's election was not broadly recognized except for specific actors. Now, and I'm just painting this picture. People can
I'm trying to understand this. Between the system of Venezuela and that of North Korea, which one is better?
Which one is better?
Yeah.
North Korea? Oh, North Korea is awful. Like it's not even in the same ballpark.
Yeah, but I don't see the US going to kidnap the leader of that country.
Oh, I'm sure we'll get to it one of these days. But here's the thing: Venezuela is right.
All right. What about the system in Saudi Arabia? Is it better than that of Venezuela?
Again, geopolitics. So
it's not really about right or wrong. It's about interest.
Well, it can be, yeah, of course, and that's what geopolitics is, right? There is an ethical and moral. There's an ethical and moral aspect to it. But as you and I both know,
the ethical and moral aspect is an argument you make to appeal to your base of support to seek the political oxygen you need to carry out these actions. It's not as if it's all about morality, and morality in this case is not even important. It's the argument you make. For instance, I tell you one: Iran is barbaric, is brutal, it's uncivilized. It belongs in the dark ages because of the leadership, and women are forced to cover their hair.
Yes.
So you sell the story to the American people so that you can have enough support to go and do the bidding of ExxonMobil and Chevron.
Hold on. By the way, and I'll leave this little anecdote out there. The will of the oil companies has almost nothing to do with this other than regaining debt. And also, because a lot of people will say this about like Iraq. Oh, we went to Iraq and we stole their oil. We didn't, though. Their oil ministry continued to function and they made deals with whoever they want. One of my trips to that they did. One of my trips to the oil ministry there were Iranians in a room.
Can the Iraqis trade their oil in yuan? Can the Iraqis trade their oil or in alternative currencies? The problem is that people think America is going to steal oil so they can use it for their industries. No, America wants to control what happens in that sector of the world, which is the most important. So if you want to compete with China, for instance, what do? You don't let the Chinese buy cheap oil from Venezuela.
Some of the commodities that are going their direction. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. You make sure you are in control of how China can get oil, the pricing, and in what method they can get the transaction, so that if push comes to shove, you can deny them and
Right.
force them to starve. So this is
no,
what
not
is
starve,
happening.
not
So
starve, not starve. Because push comes to shove, what do wars run on? Wars run on logistics. They run on fuel. They run on food. They run on how well you can arm and how well you can continue sustainment of your troops, right? So that's one of the reasons the U.S. is the best, because like we've, whether people like it or not, right? Since World War II, we realized everything is about your production capability, your logistics, your sustainment, how well you can feed your soldiers, along with arms and ammunition and training, right? So like training is second to none in the rest of the world, right? And the thing is, yeah, if we had to get into a China right now, we might have enough control over oil exports around the world to cut that off so that we can get a conflict over with faster. Now, hopefully we never get to that point. That's not the point, but let's focus on Venezuela for 1 second, right? Just so we
yeah,
can.
and I think I'm more comfortable with this part of the argument you're making, which is based purely on realism and realpolitik, than the initial argument of morality, how the
Well, we
Venezuelan
can get
government
to the
is not good
morality and
enough.
ethics part too. Now, I'll tell you why.
Yeah, but again, this is why it's not sticking to me, because you cannot make
No,
this
I
argument
get it. I get it. I get
when
it.
you just when you
We
just
can have
supported
both.
a brutal, barbaric bombardment of Gaza for 3 years, when
Uh-huh.
you're supporting a Saudi dictatorship, when you are okay with the government of the UAE slaughtering Africans in the Sudan. So again, this is where it
I got
doesn't
you,
really add up to me.
but let me finish the thing on Venezuela. I'll do it really quick, and I'll give you the moral, ethical piece, because this also goes over into Iran and Kurdistan, for instance, and then and along with the realpolitik. So from the realpolitik perspective, it's like, yes, this is our backyard. It's within our national security interests. Venezuela,
Monroe Doctrine.
right? Monroe Doctrine, Donroe Doctrine, whatever you want to call it, right? It is within our interest to make sure that our neighbors can't fire missiles at us. It was the same thing with the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? We did not want to have nuclear arms in our backyard, right? And people can be like, oh, well, what right? Well, at that point, it doesn't matter. I'm going to be against having anyone having nukes in our backyard. That's a whole nother matter. So go to Venezuela, right? And now you have them doing what they're doing with the IRGC. The IRGC is skirting sanctions as well. China's getting oil. So we have multiple competitors in the world, if not enemies. We don't even have to call them enemies. We can call them competitors, right? And they are potentially becoming a worse and worse and worse security threat in ways beyond what they've already been. So the designation as an FTO, right? The blockade, all of this was a buildup, plus the indictment against Maduro, plus the fact that on scale, we'll just say on scale, he was not recognized as the elected official. It was like, okay, we have everything we need, ostensibly, to go in, and assuming we don't just destroy everything, we go in quick and fast, we pull them out, okay? Most of the deaths are Cubans who are part of the repression system within Venezuela, so nobody's really upset about that. And then here's the biggest part, and here's where the morality piece comes in. You have a ongoing refugee crisis for 26 years, but especially in the last 13 years. And you have this incredible outcry from Venezuelans that are forced into diaspora, and an incredible outcry inside of Venezuela that asks for and supports what we have done in order to get Maduro out of the way and get Delcy Rodriguez, who is really the power behind the power. I mean, let's be real. If we really wanted to remove the entire regime, we would have taken her with it, right? So Delcy Rodriguez is now changing behavior, and she can launch all the anti-American rhetoric she wants, but in the end, she's like, we're going to work with you. Okay, great. Now this benefits Venezuelans in multiple ways. It is going to be a boost to the Venezuelan economy if everything goes well and we keep moving forward. The investment that can come from both us and our allies is significantly better than Russia or China. That can get a lot of Venezuelans from the oil sector who left to go back and become part of that industry again, right?
Venezuelans, you mean Americans? You mean Americans?
No, Venezuelans who left. Dude, the Venezuelan oil industry not only had crumbling infrastructure, all of their people left. The people in the top of the organization, all the way down to the workers. A lot of them work in Canada now.
ExxonMobil, Chevron.
Or they work wherever they can, where their skill sets can actually get paid. Not to mention, the other thing I forgot was how Maduro started doing the saber rattling at Guyana, threatening over half of Guyana's territory, because oil rich areas, right? So he kind of set himself up for this.
No, he's not. He's not. That place belongs to Venezuela, and the Americans have not had a problem with that until Chavez and Maduro came in, and
Dude, Guyana's
Guyana
been
is
a country
okay.
for how long? I mean, there's not really any argument about
Yeah.
that.
So, well, okay, but let's focus on what is really going on.
Okay, but wait,
In
before
the Middle,
we move on, I
because
just want to
it's
make it.
also connected to the whole oil politics, and
It is.
I'm
But
so
let's focus on one thing here, and I want to make this very clear. The buy-in from both diaspora, who had been pushed out of Venezuela, and people in the country, okay, overwhelmingly supports limited and effective operations, right? And this was a very effective operation, whether people agree with it or not. It was very effective at changing behavior and potentially getting investment back into Venezuela that desperately needs, and people being able to go back home, and et cetera, right? And changes and a long-term transition in the government. Machado didn't come through and say, okay, I'm in charge now. She knows that, hey, this is a longer transition period. We're going to work with the people that are still there, and we're going to and hopefully there will be better elections this next season or whatever it is, right? So this is probably about as ideal as it gets without us going to the threshold of we wait for them to attack us, okay? So keeping that in mind, if you want to move on to Iran, we can start with the buy-in of the people, right? The buy-in from the people, right? From the people I've talked to on the ground in Iran, the people that I've talked to in diaspora who also are talking to people on the ground. All right.
What percentage of the Iranian, and I don't want us to just switch like that, because again, it's
Sure.
we talked about Venezuela, we've talked about the trade standoff between the US and Canada. So one other topic I want us to talk about is Iran. And we're seeing a similar pattern, or some are arguing that America is moving this heavy kinetic power towards the Persian Gulf to try to use the threat of the use of force against the government to change its behavior, to force it into a position of acquiescence, if you like. So do you think this will work in Iran? Do you think it's possible? Do you think, how do you think the government of Iran will react? And would the American government use overwhelming power to bomb the regime out of power?
So I can
and
tell
leave
you,
a power vacuum, or replace with the son of the Shah?
There's not going to be a power vacuum. That much I can at least tell you. But let me paint it from where I've been working on this, right? So part of what I do is government relations, and where my advice is sought out, I give that advice, right?
I'll be back. Just keep on. Yeah.
So when it comes specifically to Iran right now, I would say that this is a situation where I've never seen so much support on all ends of it. The only people who are against us intervening in Iran is the IRGC itself. The Iranian people are quite literally asking us to help them, right? Even the ones that I've spoken to where I say, hey, do you understand that us intervening, right, in effective ways, whether it's taking out IRGC targets or providing weapons directly to the people or whatever the case is, you do understand that collateral damage is a part of it. There is no way around that there will be people that will be lost in this process. And what their reply has been unanimously is they're already killing us. The IRGC is already unaliving us. They've already unalived my cousin, my sister, whatever. It's better for us to get this over with, essentially, is the sentiment. So please, we expected help to arrive sooner. So and that kind of paints a sad picture, but at the end of the day, the Iranian people in Iran, as well as the diaspora, are quite literally asking for us to intervene in an effective and responsible way, okay? Now, when it comes to the American people are kind of split on how much we should be involved in the rest of the world at all, right? But that has to do with ideology more than realism or realistic situations. But what I have found is in our government, okay, and this is very rare for this much support for a president, right? At least behind closed doors, since they're not really saying it out in the open on like Twitter or anything, the support for getting this done effectively and quickly and responsibly, as quickly as possible, to make this change and force this transition of power, okay? And get them to stop killing their own people that are asking for our help. The support within the US government is bipartisan at this point. Every office that I engage with has told me the same thing, that they support effective and responsible intervention as quickly as possible. And some people are questioning.
So
hey,
what would that look? What would that
What
look
is that?
like? Support for the Kurds, support for thousands of dissidents in America and Canada and in Israel, to bring back the son of the Shah, who looks very frail. And
So in
would it
social
be
media,
would it
go
be
ahead.
to use uh, power to bomb the regime out of power in Tehran? But if you do that, what are the guarantees that this can come off good, like it did in Venezuela, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. So here's the thing. We're talking about completely different things. A lot of people refer to Iraq, completely different situation. Some people refer to Venezuela, completely different situation. We can't handle any of these, Iran, the same way we handled either of these things. The situation with the Kurds, completely different situation, right? And we can get to that in a second. When it comes to Iran, you have a transition of power that is available. And it's not just the Shah versus Khamenei. You see, a lot of people in social media, they deduce it down to these two personalities, when in reality, what we're talking about in a transition of power is the Shah is one figurehead, right? And in Iran itself, and I had this discussion with my friends in the Department of State who have been on the Iran desk for many, many years of their lives, of their, professional lives. You have potential other individuals like Narges Mohammadi, a woman who is in prison right now, who has the buy-in of the Iranian people in Iran as well as diaspora. So there's a whole plethora of figures that would be part of this transitional government that's already set up, basically. The Shah is just one piece of that. And the other thing too is and I've told this to some of my Iranian friends, one thing that they're going to have to accept is that I would never be able to know who it is. Obviously, intelligence agents in very high levels of the government would know this, but there are obviously going to be members of the IRGC government that are ready to turn on the government and be a part of that transition. And some people are going to have to accept the fact that these guys were kind of, playing both sides or hiding in the corner, not really saying anything until they have the opportunity when we clear the pathway for them by taking out some of the officers, the IRGC assets themselves or whatever. Until that pathway is cleared, those individuals can't necessarily come out of the shadows. Some of them kind of sort of have, but people can take their best guess which those individuals be. So they would also, some of those individuals would still be a part of the government in transition. The Iranian people, from what I've seen also, despite, varying degrees of, varying ethnicities and groups and interests and stuff, for the most part seem to have a cohesiveness that you won't necessarily find in other parts of the Middle East. Iraq was a powder keg. The second that the Saddam leash came off and the Ba'athist leash came off and the army's leash came off, it descended into sectarian violence. Shia versus Sunni, multiple different Sunni groups, different jihadist groups, et cetera, right? Iran doesn't necessarily have that kind of makeup. You have a couple of groups that may feel a little bit separate, like the Kurds or the Balochis, but even a lot of Kurdish Iranians that I've talked to, like, they're interested in remaining a part of Iran, while also, as long as, parliament is in place that has their representation and interests at heart, things like that. So it's not going to descend into mad chaos, right? And what we can do, right, on our end is empower the people. And what that means is we can empower them through direct transfer of arms, whatever that means, airdrops, funneling, whatever, right? So that they have a fighting chance when they're facing off with the IRGC themselves. We can take out IRGC assets outside of the city or highly targeted strikes inside of urban areas that take out key members. These are things that we can do without ever putting boots on the ground. A handful of special operations here and there. But I think we learned our lessons about sending in the entire American juggernaut, so to speak, into countries unless it is on a humanitarian basis. Because that's another part of this, is once that regime change happens, there is going to be a potential humanitarian crisis in terms of water, food, et cetera. So the other reason for so many American military assets to be there isn't just to conduct strikes, right? It's an overwhelming show of force to try and get the regime to leave on its own, right? And if it doesn't, we'll remove them, right? Or we'll help the people remove them. But the other thing about the American military, a lot of people don't understand, I really want people to hear me on this, is it is one of the best logistical organizations that you can have in terms of delivering things like humanitarian aid. We have mandates to work with NGOs on the ground, mandates to work with local communities, mandates to move all kinds of food, fuel, supplies, engineering teams that can rebuild infrastructure, things like that. So all of that force there is not just a combat force. It's also in the aftermath a force that can also provide for some not all, some of the immediate needs of the Iranian people on the ground, because they're already in the middle of a water crisis. They're already in the middle of some economic crises that are pretty bad. And to keep them moving forward, right, as things get better through that transition, that's another reason to have those military assets there along with our partners to help provide that aid. And I really want people to understand that. Part of my military background involves intelligence, special operations, and civil affairs. Okay?
So I want to hear your assessment on the possible outbreak, not just of civil war in Iran, if things go south, but also the impact on the region as a whole. America have a lot of assets in the area. Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar,
Correct.
even the UAE could be targeted. And we saw that during the last war. Analysts, analysts in Iran have always been maintaining that fighting a war with Israel for them is very expensive because of the lack of proximity, if you like. But you have these other countries in the area, like Qatar, that is very close. There's no amount of air defense system that can help that country. The same thing with Saudi Arabia.
Correct.
The same thing applied to. So if you have all these almost semi-autonomous commanders in the mountains of Iran that can actually launch some of these missiles to target your assets in the region, don't you see a bigger problem in the region by you starting up another war?
I think that people give Iran a little too much credit, because here's the thing. Depending on how quickly we control their airspace, there's not very many of those missiles that are likely to be able to launch. And that's one of the reasons I think that we haven't stepped in and helped right away, because there's a lot of Iranians that are questioning, how did we let this happen instead of being there for them, right, quickly. And part of the answer to that may be that we've moved all these assets into place to mitigate the concerns of our other partners in the region. Now, Qatar is a weird little ally, right? Like we can get into that another time. But once we have control of that airspace, which would be within hours, right, being able to take out a lot of those missile batteries on the ground, drone forces, et cetera, is pretty quick, because we'll have those eyes on. We already have eyes on probably most of those assets. So I think that the impact from them doing these launches is going to be relatively limited, okay? There is some concern that they could weaponize what little bit of uranium they've been able to enrich to a certain point, and they could throw it inside a ballistic missile. And if just that one ballistic missile happens to get through, that's pretty impactful. But that's also one of the reasons that we're there. It's either we stop this now, right, or we deal with it 5 years from now. And our allies in the region, including Israel, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, get to deal with it 5 years from now when it's much worse. So this is one of those things where it's kind of a now or never. You have the buy-in of the people are rising up. You have all these assets available, okay? We have the capabilities. Israel, as our partner, has the capabilities to do a substantial effort in this. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE, and this is anecdotal, it doesn't matter if you quote me on this or not, but people within the Saudi regime, the Qataris, the UAE, both by country and inside their government, they're kind of split on this. There is lobbying pushback that a lot of people don't know about here in DC from those GCC countries, but also those GCC countries behind the scene, in many of them or their advisors or whatever.
But they're against an intervention. Most of them are actually against. Particularly the Saudis are seeing the shifting balance in the region, with countries like the UAE now firmly doing the bidding of Israel and America, even more than the Saudis in terms of on the ground in Yemen, Somaliland, in Libya. The UAE have more mercenaries now in Africa than any other country, and so the Saudis are worried that, hang on a second, if Iran is now this uniting force for everybody, and we say, oh, we're buying weapons from America because of the threat of Iran, because this is the rallying call. This is the only thing that is uniting everybody. Right. And now you take out Iran. Iran now becomes an ally of the West. Who's next? So the Saudis are monitoring what is happening very carefully, and most of them are actually trying to prevent it. And so even though you're saying, oh, well, we're going to do this and that, and our allies, these guys are your allies, necessity is the mother of invention. Is that what they say? So these guys,
necessity is the
mother of
Yeah,
invention.
go ahead. I can't think of it.
Yeah. So, but the point I'm making here is that the Saudis know that they have to live with the power in the region, which is Israel and America. America, most importantly, but the road to America's heart is Israel. So you don't have to be on the wrong side of Israel. Just keep them at bay enough and look for one enemy to blame for all your problems that you guys can rally around. This is what these Arab Gulf countries are doing on sectarian basis. But I'm not sure they really want Iran destroyed, because if Iran is destroyed, what now becomes a rallying call? Is the pendulum going to now swing to Turkey? Is it going to go to Egypt? Because there's a lot of these guys, I don't know, and this is my problem with most of these Arab countries, is that they are very short-term in their thinking. They are not that strategic. They're very emotional. And while America is sitting down explaining all these things to them like you're doing, they're buying it like, oh, yes, it's fantastic. Well, the U.S. sees you as a cash cow, 100 billion, 200 billion every year for arms contract. So if Iran is gone, what would be the necessity for all of that? And on top of that, you have militias in Iraq, because you left that out as well. They're about 300,000 strong, armed to the teeth. And you're saying that these guys are part of the security establishment of the state. So you can look up the Hashd al-Shabi. It is the Popular Mobilization Forces.
Well, let me share a lens with you to look at this though. So in the last 2 years, all this Iranian influence, all the IRGC's influence in the region has been rolled back. Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, whatever, right? And what we've seen is a surge, whether people recognize it or not. There is a growing Sunni power in the region. Okay, now whether Saudi Arabia controls and influences that, anybody can argue, right? And what's happening in Kurdistan, for me, is a red flag. It's like, okay, this is the consequence of rolling back other powers in the region. And that is that Turkey and the Syrian regime, okay, and ISIS adjacent Islamists, whatever you want to call them, decided that this was the time, while everybody's distracted with Iran and while all this Iranian power and influence has been rolled back, this was the time to go after other people that they view as problematic or enemy, right? The Kurdish-led SDF, which, by the way, just so everybody knows, the SDF is also proportionally Arab in nature. So you have these Kurdish-aligned Arab fighters, including Arab women who have all joined the Kurdish fighting women and stuff like that, to confront the Syrian regime, and I'm going to call it that for now, and ISIS, etc. So this is a pretty big coalition of people that have now come under assault by, I don't know why Syria just came on, that have come under assault in the interim here, while we've been distracted and while this surge in power, other power has been released, while the Iranian regime has been rolled back. So that is an interesting thing to look at, right? A sad thing to look at and go, okay, does this mean, exactly to your point, these different power structures change, and now we're dealing with new enemies or old enemies that resurge because the Iranian power just isn't there anymore, or the IRGC's power isn't in place. So it's like a double-edged sword. And that's the thing about geopolitics. A lot of people don't realize this isn't like a one-stop shop. You know, it's not like there's some kumbaya moment in the future where we're going to get to, if we do everything right. Power changes, people's interests change. Also, people's pride and arrogance can drive what those power interests are. Like, I think we can go down any metric and determine that the HTS ISIS forces and the men that drive that are unethical, whereas the Kurds and the Druzi who are fighting for survival deserve any support we can give them, whether it's through the SDF, Druze forces, whatever the case is.
I'm sorry, these are not practical positions. You're making it, again, you keep moving back and forth between practical, like things on the ground, like practical aspects of this real politic in the region, and then the morality side of it. Because the Kurds, on one hand, have supported you, and when push comes to shove, you dump them. Because we saw that the Americans have given a tap on the shoulder to HTS and Jolani and say, now you're the king of Syria, you can do with it whatever you want. And they're doing exactly what they have been asked to do. You know, we see them rolling in, and hopefully they'll be in Rojava very soon. And as they are going and moving and claiming to be doing deals to integrate the SDF and all their fighters and all their officials into the Syrian system, they are committing atrocities against the Kurds. Again, the Kurds have done this so many times that every time they support America, when the music stops, they are the ones that will remain there to be
They end up
targeted, to
holding
be
the bag.
tortured, to be massacred by
So,
Saddam, by the Assad, and now we're seeing it with Jolani.
and Sab, so let me deviate a little bit to where I could even say that I've been radicalized a little bit in this moment. I believe very strongly, both for honor and for pragmatic purposes, in supporting people like the Kurds that have stood by our side, that have done the brunt of the fighting for us against ISIS, whether it was side by side with us. With every combat veteran I know that has ever been in Kurdish territories, fighting ISIS, fighting Al Qaeda, whatever, has a story where Kurdish militias saved them. Okay, we have a metric in terms of women's integration where they're literally fighting for their lives and their freedom against these pukes, right? We can say that they have the moral high ground, even if the Kurds aren't perfect. Look, the Kurds aren't perfect. And Syrian propaganda will constantly try to highlight this stuff in really twisted ways. Now, me as an American and me as a veteran, and as someone who speaks for a lot of my fellow veterans out there, we believe in being strong allies of the Kurds. And I also am making the business case to my government contacts as we speak about some kind of recognition of Iraqi Kurdistan and Syrian Kurdistan as, you know, a singular entity, ideally in Kurdistan, and giving them our allyship in full support, open support, because they've not only been good allies in the fight and proven themselves, they've also been one of the most functional societies between those two countries in the last 20 years. Kurdistan of northern Iraq was one of those places you could go to Erbil.
So you're talking about the KRG on the border with Turkey.
Yes. So
and a lot of this have happened. Yeah, in Iraq, but a lot of it have happened not just because it's a lot of it came from Turkish investment in Erbil. You know, this is what you're referring to, where you have
like. Here's the thing, none of these are mutually
Barzani.
exclusive. You know, one day the Turks can be nice, and then the next day the Turks are slaughtering Kurds. Like we get this. Like this changes, right? The Kurds of Iraq proved, right, that Kurdish sovereignty is possible, because under autonomy, just autonomy, they had a more functional, safe society right up until ISIS tried to invade, right? And then they fought off ISIS along with the Syrian Kurds, right? They had a functional and safe society even when the rest of Iraq was in total chaos. Okay, you could go to Erbil as a security advisor, as military or whatever. You could walk around. You could go to the university, you could go to the club. It was safe. If you tried to go outside the green zone in Baghdad, you needed a security escort. There was a chance you would get shot, beheaded, blown up, whatever the case is. So my point in all this is that the Kurds have proven that they function as a society, kind of like the reasons for recognizing Somaliland, right? Somaliland has functioned as its own country, right? Plus all the other, you know, other little details there. They have functioned as their own country for 30 years. They've proven that, right? There's no reason to hold back on that level of recognition, even if one day in the future, all the other countries around them are able to reach that level and then choose to reintegrate, right? But Kurdistan itself, the Kurds have proven this. And that's the pragmatic reason, the realpolitik for me, that we should support them. They are more functional than many of their neighbors. So that's where the realpolitik comes in, not just the fact that they've stood by our side for decades and effectively have stood by our side by decades. There's the emotional piece, the honor of it, so to speak, and there's also the pragmatic piece in the region.
So let's talk about Turkey. What's your take on Turkey? Turkey is a NATO member. It's a so-called ally of the United States. What would you say about the sort of politics they're playing in the region? Their frosty relationship recently with Israel. And the other side, the Arab countries are also saying Turkey is also working with Israel and selling them oil. You know, their relationship with Azerbaijan, and this whole idea of a grand, you know, Turkish empire, resuscitation of a grand Turkish empire again, where they can connect with their former, you know, Ottoman territories and so on and so forth. And also their relationship with Iran and Qatar. So tell me a bit about Turkey and your opinion on Turkey.
So I'm one of these people that say a year ago, was very skeptical but hopeful about rebuilding a relationship between Israel and Turkey, for instance, while developing and moving forward the situation in Syria being the pivot point. And one of the things that I put out in a policy paper last year was that either people can take this moment and turn Syria into sort of like a bridge between Israeli and Turkish relations. It almost seems counterintuitive, or it can become a flashpoint and it's turned into a flashpoint. I find that Turkey has stabbed a lot of people in the back, including the Kurds right now. So I'm probably not the best person to ask about Turkey from a pragmatic perspective, because yeah, sure, they're a NATO ally, but they've also decided to test their limits on us and see what we do with Iran in the meantime. And that's another reason that's like, okay, moving on Iran establishes our credibility, whether people like it or not, establishes our credibility. Or if we don't move on Iran and we don't help our Kurdish allies, then as America, we're going to be this big, ginormous, powerful being that Turkey's going to walk all over, that Iran's going to walk all over. And we can just go sit in the corner in shame instead of actually doing what we're being asked to do by these people. Anyway, so really when it comes to Turkey, you can see over the last couple of years, and even before that, you can see Turkey making its moves in different parts of the region. Turkey's established its footprint in the oil sector in Somalia. And one of the reasons for the recognition of Somaliland by Israel was to counter that presence in the region, right? Because Turkey is acting more and more and more like a competitor and even less like an ally, even within a NATO perspective, right? And now we're seeing that full blown in Syria right now. And I think a lot of it comes down to, when it comes to American power specifically in this instance, what we choose to do now is going to determine how seriously these other countries take us, including our own. I'm going to call Turkey a pseudo ally. Yeah, it's an ally on paper, but really it hasn't really been aligned with us in a variety of ways for many, many years.
Yeah, I think most of those countries are like that.
Yeah, and again, all these countries.
You can put Turkey in the same box as maybe Pakistan, because Pakistan is also an ally of America, I was told.
And yet behind our back, they kept the Taliban in power. Like, we were helping Pakistan while they were funneling the Taliban back in, and we weren't allowed to chase them over the border. Yeah, the Taliban would not be in power today.
Oh, no, of course you were. I mean, if there's a Pakistani on this channel now while we're having this conversation, they will have a completely different opinion, because they lost, close to 50,000, 100,000 people during your war in Afghanistan, particularly in the tribal areas. So they also suffered the brunt of your military expedition in Afghanistan.
Pakistan did?
So, yes, Pakistan did.
Dude,
are you aware? Are you aware of this? That Pakistan lost tens of thousands of people.
Okay. If you're talking about,
no, it's not. No, it's not the ISI. The ISI is the military intelligence. It's a subsect of the army. It's the Pakistani state.
Yes, I know.
The Pakistani state suffered tens of thousands of casualties. Do you know, like during that whole operation,
yes,
Pakistan
the TTP would fight with him. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, because the TTP started attacking the state
more recently. And here's the thing, though. We can get into the nitty-gritty details later, but overall, the Taliban was part of Pakistani influence, and I know that's how they saw it, or at least from their end, right?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Look, this is a very convenient argument for you as an American to make, when if you look at the structure of the Taliban today, it was actually a creation of American, Saudi, and Pakistani intelligence.
It wasn't, though. We didn't have any. They weren't created while we were in there fighting Russia.
No. I'm saying the history of it. If you look at the Taliban today, and by the way, I know how the Taliban emerged, I think 95 or 96.
Yeah,
because the Mujahideen,
they were being trained 93 to 96 or so, and then they went in there. Yeah.
No, okay, so the history is simple, right? I don't want to go back to the Mujahideen because this was in the 80s. But after the war ended and Ahmad Shah Massoud was killed, most of those guys turned against each other and they couldn't form power in the center. This is how the Talib emerged.
But Ahmad Shah Massoud was killed right before we invaded.
No, Ahmad Shah Massoud was killed after the war, after they defeated the Soviets. And this was after they had
2001. He wasn't killed until 2001.
You can check up
Ahmad Shah Massoud fought the Soviets. Then he got into it with the other powers. They basically
other groups.
Civil war. Right, the other groups. The Taliban swooped in. Ahmad Shah.
So why did the Taliban come in?
Because of Pakistani support, number one, and number two, because yes, these idiots were fighting each other. And Shah Massoud at one point, I remember,
Exactly.
right? But Shah Massoud, who was never someone that we supported enough, in my opinion, because he was actually effective at fighting the Soviets. By the way, I'll actually make a point here on this specifically. So Massoud admitted years later that he was part of the problem that brought success to the Taliban, right? And I'll have to try and find the quote later or something like that. But basically, he owned up to the fact that he was part of the problem in fighting with these other guys over power in Kabul or whatever before the Taliban were able to come up and take advantage of the chaos. Now, the Taliban has always been a tool of Pakistan. Like, let's be real about that. Like, Pakistan wants to have its geopolitical influence in its own way and on its own terms. And the Taliban was part of that. Okay. Now, Shah Massoud didn't die until right before our invasion. So he was
2001.
assassinated. Right. He was assassinated close right before we finally got to do our invasion. Right. Nowadays, you have.
Yeah, but that's not. But that wasn't the point I was trying to make. I was talking about how the Taliban emerged. The Taliban emerged through the process. Some of the Taliban fighters, some of the Taliban members you see today in power, some of them also fought as Mujahideen, part of the Mujahideen when they were young boys. And the reason why they took over power is because the Mujahideen could not agree on power sharing. So, and if you look at the Taliban mostly came from the southern part of Afghanistan, mostly from the Pashtun area, from Kandahar, from the power bases in Kandahar, and people like Mullah Muhammad Omar didn't even go to Kabul and sent most of his boys there. So the point I'm making is that, yeah, there is a connection. There's a connection, not just political connection, but connection in terms of ethnicity and the tribe, and you know how this primordial sort of politics work with Afghanistan, with Pakistan. Because if you go to the area of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the KPK, majority of the people there are Pashtun. In fact, the second, if I'm sure it should be one of the biggest national groups in Pakistan, the Pashtun.
Yes.
And somebody even told me that there are more Pashtuns in Pakistan than in Afghanistan.
Yes.
So when the Americans are at the end of the conflict started supporting the Tajiks and the Uzbeks and the other groups, the Taliban came from a group, the Pashtun, which was the biggest group in Afghanistan. This is how they were able to push their way into power. And speaking of Pakistan again a little bit, because you say, oh, these are the bad guys, these are allies, but really not. In the lead up to the war in 2001, President Bush made a statement and says, either you're with us or you're against us. And he was talking to Pakistan. The Americans were already in conversation with India to use their air base to strike the Taliban. So, and there was even an open threat from the Bush administration through I think Richard Armitage, who was the CIA director at that time. He called the DGISI and told him openly that if Pakistan does not support us, we will bomb you back to the Stone Age. And you can see statements like that being put out there even by the former president, Pervez Musharraf. So again, Pakistan also have their own interests. They have their own geopolitical ambitions. And they have always used Afghanistan, and they've always played this game of keeping that part of Afghanistan a bit volatile so that they can have, in political and military terms, strategic depth against India, because Pakistan is very, very narrow. And there's also the issue with the Baloch problem. So Pakistan is also dealing with, they are in a political minefield. And that whole area is a political minefield. So they have their own interest. So this is...
Sav, I don't know if you can hear me. You're frozen. Yeah, you're frozen again. If you can hear me, you're frozen. Oh, wait, guys. Guys, again, this is my fun and fitness account. Go follow it, okay? It has nothing to do with my professional life. It's just for shits and giggles. You're frozen, Sav. Hopefully someone's messaging you. Hey, if you're watching this on the TikTok live, can you guys make a comment and let me know if you can actually... Oh, wow, there's a chat on here too. Didn't even see that. Let's see. Enjoying this discussion. Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Now I see the chat, everybody. Mike gives off the vibe that he votes right wing. I don't vote at all, actually. And my excuse is that I have a voter card in Puerto Rico. So as a resident of a U.S. territory, I can't vote in federal
Welcome back.
elections.
Welcome back. Oh my God.
Thanks, man. I was just going through the comments here. Mike gives off the vibe that he votes right wing, and I'm explaining that I don't vote at all because I have my voter ID card in Puerto Rico, which is a U.S. territory. So I have an excuse not to vote in federal elections. Thank God. And as
Yeah.
a government relations professional or semi-professional, it's like I have to work with whoever's in that seat. It's the same thing in Colombia, Puerto Rico. It doesn't matter if I like them or not. So
Yeah, I'll share this video with you about the Western Hemisphere and the U.S. involvement. It's a whole long list litany of countries. But and as we come to the end of the conversation, yeah,
Oh
the
wait,
situation
Saf,
with
let me piggyback on exactly what you're saying, and this goes back to what I was saying with the Kurds and everything else too. I'm promoting in government and in space, so I usually give a neutral perspective as possible when I'm advising people in the government or the private sector, et cetera, right? Even NGOs. However, when I have the space to do so, I promote the idea that who we align ourselves with, even within the framework of realpolitik, brings better outcomes if we have standards and we maintain those standards. So some of the people that we allied ourselves with in Afghanistan was actually detrimental to us and our purpose and our mission. And so that's as one example, right? Being wishy-washy as an ally to the Kurds, who have shown, right, at least close ethical standards that we have, as well as being strong allies, right? These are the people that we need to stand by with and not vacillate on that just because we think we need to, right? Or because, oh, it might be better for us to align with these people temporarily that are actually really awful. I think the standards that we hold ourselves to with whom we ally ourselves will change ultimately the outcomes that we've seen. I think if we were better about who we allied ourselves with in Afghanistan, we wouldn't have the Taliban there today. We wouldn't have had the kind of withdrawal that we did. And that's something that I think we need to change even within the framework of realpolitik, that maintaining those standards actually leads to better outcomes. So that would be kind of my statement on that. So
absolutely. And the last point I want to make before we leave, back in my home country, Nigeria, the president of Nigeria, Tinubu Bola Ahmed, visited Turkey recently and did a host of deals with Turkey for technological transfer, trade, partnership, and host. So the talks are actually expanding their reach outside Europe and Asia to even to Africa. They're propping up the government.
How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that alignment with Turkey?
No, I have a problem with that, just like I have a problem with the West. I have a problem with the UAE as well, just like I have a problem with the West. So when these guys are using Africa as a testing ground for their power and their technology, it's problematic. So it's Israel, by the way, and the US.
Yeah,
so,
of course. In Cameroon and other places, like they're helping the Cameroonians with counterterrorism in the north. Like there's a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't realize. Even as the French have pulled out, other people have moved in to fill that gap. And for the people on the ground, as you know, you need something. You need some kind of support. And the question is, what kind of support is going to give you the best outcomes? So that.
Yeah. So as events continue to unfold in the Middle East, we hope to have you back on the channel. It was an amazing, because I can see it from the feedback and the chats. A lot of them are actually very, very excited that you came on the channel to do this with us today. So as events continue to unfold on the international scene, even with what is going on in China, and this is the closing remarks. About 5 or 6 days ago, there were reports that the highest military ranker in China has now been arrested, and then he's facing trial or investigation. His name is General Jiang Yujia.
Yeah.
Towards the end of last year, there were reports that when Xi Jinping was ill, at the beginning of the year, some said he had cancer and so on and so forth, that the guy made some changes that the leadership did not like, and that there's suspicions that he's trying to orchestrate some sort of takeover. working with the old guard people like the former Prime Minister Wen Jiabao and so on and so forth. So, yeah, these are topics we can also talk about. And thank you so much for coming.
No
Do you have any
problem.
closing statement?
Nothing. The only other thing I can think is one metric by which we can measure the morality, so to speak, or the ethics of the people that we choose to work with or not. I think comes down to the integration of women at all levels of society, right? In places like Iran, they're not doing so well because of things that have led to things like the Women Life Freedom Movement. The Kurds fight incredibly well, and they have women who join their ranks, right? They're a good ally. They are people who we know we can rely on. And the integration of women within armed forces, politics, et cetera, I think that is a big indicator of who we can and should work with, more so than other people. Even if we do have to work with different countries based on certain interests, the fact is that is a big indicator of outcomes, right? Whether people like Israel or not, I mean, Israel's a powerhouse, and they have diversity, women, the whole 9 yards, like all that exists there, right? So I think that is something that everyone needs to look at when they're deciding who they align themselves with, is how integrated is that society ethnically and by gender as well. So that would be one other thing. That's just a food for thought at the end. That's it.
Yeah, food for thought. So we draw to conclusion this part of the conversation, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, man. See you again.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. All right. So, guys, don't forget to subscribe. It's very important to share and leave a comment if you have any question in relations to the conversation we just had. Don't forget to like and share and leave a comment. And hopefully we see